In this video, I will be talking about PLC counters. I will explain what PLC counters are, how they work, the different types of counters, and give some examples of how they are used. PLC counters are internal PLC instructions that can be used to count input or output signals in the PLC program. These counters operate like relay counters, but you cannot hold a PLC counter in your hand, and they do not need to be connected to wires to operate. There are two main types of PLC counters, the count up counter and the count down counter. For the counter up counters, we have a counter file name, a counter preset value, a counter accumulated value, a counter count up bit, and a counter done bit. For the counter down counters, we have the same bits and values. The only thing that is different is this counter down bit on the output. As you can see, we have this as counter up bit for the counter up counter. There are also two internal memory bits of counter overflow and counter underflow, which we'll discuss later in this video. The counter file name is a PLC tag. This tag is where you can find the counter's preset and accumulated values and the counter's count up, count down, done, overflow, and underflow bits. Some PLCs create the counter file name for you, and other PLCs have you create the counter file name. For all of my counter examples, I will use the counter file name, counter1. I will also use a momentary push button to trigger the counters. For all of my PLC counter examples, I will be using Studio 5000, which is the PLC programming software for Allen Bradley ControlLogix PLCs. But the things that you will learn here in these examples can be applied to any other PLC software, because the overall counter functions are similar to any other PLC brand. For the first example, I will talk about the count up counter. I will start by adding a count up counter instruction to a PLC program rung. I will also add the momentary push button input to this rung to trigger the counter. I will type counter 1 for the counter name and type 5 into the preset value to finish setting up this counter. Next, I will download this program to the PLC emulator. If you need any help with downloading the program, there are plenty of videos that show you how to do that. Just give YouTube a good search and you can easily find those videos. Okay, before I push the button, notice the counter's accumulated value is equal to 0. When I push and hold the button, the count up bit turns on, and the accumulated value changes to 1. When I release the button, the count up bit turns off, but the accumulated value stays at 1. So every time I push the button, the count up bit turns on, and the accumulated value increases by 1. Notice the accumulated value of my counter is now 4. At this point, when I push the button, the count up bit turns on, the done bit turns on, and the accumulated value changes to 5. If I continue to push and release the button, the count up bit will still turn on while the button is pushed, the done bit will stay on, and the accumulated value will still increase. To reset the counter back to 0 and turn off the done bit, I will have to add a counter reset bit to the PLC program and add another momentary push button input to trigger the reset bit. Now, let's say we have a workstation, and we need to know how many parts are built at this workstation. A counter can be set up to count when a part gets released in auto from this workstation. If only a certain number of parts need to be built, the done bit can be used to let the operator know when they are done. I will now add a countdown counter to my PLC program and another momentary push-button input to trigger this counter. I will type counter 1 as the counter's name. And yes, this is the same name as the count up counter. Count up and count down counters work together. When they have the same name, they share the preset and accumulated values, and they share the done bit. Again, I will push and hold the button to trigger the count up counter. Notice the count up counter acts the same as it did before the countdown counter was added, but the accumulated value of both counters increases to 1. When the accumulated value is 4 and the count up counter is triggered, the done bits on both counters will be on. At this point, when I push and hold the button to trigger the countdown counter, the countdown bit turns on, both done bits turn off, and the accumulated value of both counters decreases to 4. If I keep pushing and releasing the countdown button after the accumulated value reaches 0, it will start to count in the negative direction. A count up and a count down counter can be used to count bad parts that need to get removed and reworked. When the parts get removed, the accumulated value increases. When the parts get reworked and get put back with the good parts, the accumulated value decreases. Now, let's talk about the overflow and underflow bits. The overflow bit is used on count-up counters, and the underflow bit is used on count-down counters. When a count-up counter is at its maximum accumulated value and then gets triggered to count up, the overflow bit will turn on. When a countdown counter is at its maximum negative accumulated value and then gets triggered to count down, the underflow bit will turn on. The numbers that some of these counters will have to reach for the overflow or the underflow bits to turn on are very large. For example, I am using a ControlLogix PLC for my counter examples. The counters in ControlLogix PLCs have a maximum positive accumulated value of more than 2 billion, and they have a maximum negative accumulated value greater than minus 2 billion. That means the counters for these PLCs can count up or count down over 2 billion times before their accumulated value will overflow or underflow. These are the exact positive and negative accumulated values for these timers, if you like to know that. These minimum and maximum number values are not the same for all PLC brands, so double-check the minimum and maximum preset values of your PLC's counters before adding one to your program. In review, by watching this video, you have learned about the two main types of PLC counters, the count-up counter and the count-down counter. That these counters have a preset value, an accumulated value, a count-up bit, a count-down bit, a counter-done bit, an overflow bit, and the underflow bit. You have also learned some examples of where these counters are used. That should do it for this video. Please let us know if you have any questions about the two main types of PLC counters in the comments below. Also, make sure to like this video if you found it helpful. This will help other automation engineers like you find this video. Thanks for watching. Want to learn PLC programming in an easy-to-understand format and take your career to the next level? Head on over to realpars.com.